Thank you for purchasing Secret Society, an open discussion about child sexual abuse in the Black community. This event was really groundbreaking in terms of having an open platform where people could have an open discussion about this. We had three amazing panelists, Davina, Tephany and Sheree, and the people who came and supported the event were also amazing as well. There are many themes and many things that were highlighted as to why sexual abuse is hard to talk about in the Black community. And going off the back of this conversation, I am going to look about how we can use what we have learnt from this discussion going forward to make a difference within the Black community. I would encourage you to tell your friends, families, organisations, community groups, whoever you know about the Secret Society panel discussion event. Don't forget to let them know they can get a download of this talk from the Daughter Arise website, which is www.daughterarise.org.uk. Now, before you get into watching the recording of the event, a couple of things I need to let you know. This was the first time I'd ever done a virtual event. I've done support groups via Zoom and that was all fine, but to actually do a webinar was a new experience for me. So in a couple of places I did pause and not press record, so a couple of the questions weren't captured. So what I have done in a couple of places where that has happened is to reread the question for your benefit. That will then lead on into the discussion about that question. Because of the nature of the subject that is being discussed, if you are a survivor or somebody that's been affected by childhood sexual abuse, you may find it triggering, upsetting. If you need to take a break from watching this recording, please do so. Watch it when you feel strong enough, when you feel ready to. But I'm just going to share with you here what I shared before we started the discussion. So what is sexual abuse? There are two types of sexual abuse, contact and non-contact abuse. And sexual abuse can happen in person or online. Contact abuse is where an abuser makes physical contact with the child. This includes sexual touching of any part of a child's body, whether clothed or not, using a body part or object to rape or penetrate a child, forcing a child to take part in sexual activities, making a child undress or touch someone else. Contact abuse can include touching, kissing and oral sex. Sexual abuse isn't just penetrative. Non-contact abuse is where a child is abused without being touched by the abuser. This can be in person or online and includes exposing or flashing, showing pornography, exposing a child to sexual acts, making them masturbate, forcing a child to make, view or share child abuse images or videos, making, viewing or distributing child abuse images or videos, forcing a child to take part in sexual activities or conversations online or through a smartphone. This is also included with familial childhood sexual abuse, which is a large percentage of how sexual abuse is carried out by someone a child knows, love or trusts. Familial abuse can include people like step-parents, adoptive parents, foster carers, siblings, cousins and people who are close to the family. So here are some facts about child sexual abuse in the Black community. As I shared during this recording, there wasn't really a lot of up-to-date research about statistics to do specifically with child sexual abuse within the Black community. A lot of the research and statistics I found are dated over a few years, but still I will share them with you. Children from Black, Asian and minority or BAME groups are less likely to come to the attention of the authorities, face additional barriers to accessing statutory services and a poorer quality of support. Also amongst underreporting in another group as well are disabled children. This information is taken from the Children's Commissioner's 2015 report Protecting Young Children from Harm. In her 2004 book, No Secrets, No Lies, How Black Families Can Heal from Sexual Abuse, journalist and mental health counsellor Robin D. Stone writes 1 in 4 Black girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18 and 1 out of every 6 men reported having been sexually abused as children. At the time of Stone's book, 14% of all child sexual assault victims were male, with 20% of that abuse coming at the hands of women. These are the only specific statistics I could find in relation to the black male experience of childhood sexual abuse. 60% of black girls have experienced sexual abuse at the hands of black men before reaching the age of 18, according to an ongoing study conducted by Black Women's Blueprint. And a report by Jamaican Vulnerabilities Commission say 40% of Jamaicans' first sexual experience was forced and under the age of consent, perpetrated by someone close to home: family member, teacher, preacher, community leader. Peer empowerment organisation that supports survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and I am also the host and moderator of this panel discussion. So it's my first time doing a panel discussion, my first time doing a virtual event, and I've got these lovely ladies to join me, and I'm going to be introducing you to them shortly. So the reason why I put this event together is because there seems to be quite a few challenges and issues with Black survivors within the Black community. I am myself a survivor, but also in my work of supporting survivors over the last 10 years, I support survivors of all ethnicities, but there are some particular challenges and issues that keep coming up within the Black community for Black survivors and victims. So that is why I wanted to do this panel discussion event today, so that we can explore some of the challenges and issues and also possibly look at some solutions to some of these things that are going on. Okay, so the questions that I've put together for this event have been based upon many conversations that I've had with survivors that I've supported, people that I know, colleagues, friends, different people that have gone through childhood sexual abuse. So the basis of some of these questions I've put together have been devised from some of these conversations. Also, I did things like public surveys by just, doing tweets on Twitter and through my Daughter Arise organisation email, just asking survivors what some of the challenges are. We will also be asking some off-the-cuff questions to our panelists. Also, the attendees will be able to ask our panelists questions, and I will open up the floor at the right time for you to be able to ask those questions. Okay, so how the event will run, it will be for up to 2 hours, and the panelists will be asked a series of questions. After I've asked the questions, they will each take a turn to answer. Whoever I think is best suited to answer, they will answer the question. Tephany and Davina will be showing in part, just a small part of their experiences, and all three of our panelists will be sharing their experiences, their knowledge around this subject as well. So before we begin, I would like to introduce each of our panelists. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Davina Louis. She's founder of Dav Relate, a social media empowerment movement that encourages survivors of childhood sexual abuse. She is also a survivor of CSA, and whilst on her own journey to healing from abuse, Davina uses her experiences to help and support others on their journey. So Davina, would you like to say hello?
Hi, everybody.
Okay, we next have Tephany Stewart. She's joining us all the way from sunny California this morning. Well, not so sunny, but she's joining us from California this morning. She's an inspirational speaker, entrepreneur. She's a foster parent and adoptive mum. Tephany is an ex-social worker with extensive experience of working in child protective services, and she is also a survivor of child sexual abuse. Tephany, would you like to say hello?
Good afternoon.
And also we have Sheree Pinheiro. She's a qualified integrative Christian and secular counsellor. Since 2003, she has established her own counselling business, Beauty for Ashes, in 2010, where she works as a counsellor, life coach and mentor. Sheree also works as a child protection officer and behaviour mentor in a primary school. And she is also an ordained minister at New Testament Assembly Church in Tooting. Sheree, would you like to say hello?
Hi, lovely seeing everybody today.
So on to the first question that was recorded in part. Leading up to it, I then said to the panelists, There are not many statistics relating to child sexual abuse, specifically in the Black community. This is evidence from the information I found that is not recent. This seems to indicate that Black victims and survivors are not openly talking about their experience. I asked the panelists, why do you think this is, and why is sexual abuse underreported in the Black community?
I think we are taught even from a young age that we don't air our dirty linen in public, so to speak, and because of that, it's a culture of silence. It's a culture of silence that we don't speak about, and it's not just even sexual abuse, but any traumatic situations, we don't talk about it within the Black community. And when we're talking about sexual abuse now, it's also the victim. It can be like, will someone believe me? It's the shame that comes with it, it's the guilt that comes with it, it's and it's all those factors that are included. It's just difficult to report sexual abuse in the Black community. Also, even when they do report it, sometimes the family member, the parents, don't believe them, or are almost say to them, that they need to keep silent and not say anything. And this is just ingrained, unfortunately, in Black culture. And if we look at that, I mean, a lot of that would come if we go back to even slavery, where things would happen, but we would keep it with our, keep it silent because we don't want other people to know about those things. And unfortunately, it's carried on to today. So we've got a lot of young Black boys, young Black women that are going through sexual abuse, but don't, say anything about it.
Tephany, would you agree with Sheree that these are some of the reasons, or do you have other reasons as well for underreporting?
I do agree with Sheree, especially the statement about it goes back to times of slavery, because if you think about it, our Black women were being raped and molested, and there was nothing they could do about it. They just had to be quiet and endure it. And I feel like that was passed down generation to generation. So by the time it got to my great-great-great-grandmother, who had experienced sexual abuse by someone in her household, she held it inside. By the time it got to my grandmother, she was taught that same culture of silence too, to my mother, who then basically groomed me to be quiet and to keep our business in the house. So I think all of that trauma is generational. And so I do agree with Sheree's statement about that is why it's unreported, because of the stigma and because of the long history when it comes to we've been forced into silence. And sometimes people will say silence equals compliance. And not necessarily always, because if we've always only known silence, then it's a bad habit that we have got to learn to break.
Yeah, and I would also add that, sexual abuse, because it's so, prevalent in the Black community in some respects, we've normalized the situation. I think if you meet, as you said, 1 in 4, but, the majority of people that I meet, they can tell me that they've experienced some form of sexual abuse, whether it's the hands of a family member. It's usually at hands of a family member or cousin, or their, the actual parents. And I think also, also faith leaders, if we look at it as well, unfortunately, it's if a person is prevalent in the community, a strong figure, or if it's a faith leader, it's going to be hard to report that as well, because again, who's going to believe you if you are talking about those things? And it's better just to keep silent.
And this is something that is picked up time and time again. Davina, do you have anything to add to that in terms of underreporting and some of the issues of that, why it's underreported?
I totally agree with both ladies. I would like to add, though, sometimes as young children, I think we overhear conversations of how other people's experience have gone. So then if you were to come across something like that, you would second guess telling anyone because they're not going to believe you. So I've had friends, or I've known people that have told their parents or told their mum, and they've just totally said, that's what happens sometimes, instead of supporting them. And because I used to hear all of that, hence the reason I didn't say anything. So I definitely get that from all angles.
So Tephany, did you want to add something else to that?
Yes, may I also add a lack of knowledge? Because I'm thinking about all of the children who will feel comfortable coming forward and maybe telling a teacher or someone, but they don't know how to tell someone outside of their trusted inner familial circle. So maybe a lack of knowledge of, it's not taught in school, at least when I was growing up, hey, if there's sexual abuse in the household, these are the steps to take to safety.
Yeah. So all of these different things, generational mindsets, lack of information, not knowing how to articulate the experiences are some of the reasons why you all believe that this is a part of underreporting and why people don't speak about it.
Just one quick thing as well. I think if we were told years ago about sexual education at a young age, not in an explicit way, but don't touch here, don't touch there, or things like that, just a little bit of knowledge growing up, I think years ago, it was just not spoken about. Like nowadays, we're a little bit more open with our children, whereas my grandparents and my mum's parents also, they didn't really talk about sex or things like that. So I think now our children nowadays will be a little bit more alert. So I think that's where we're changing it a little bit. We are educating them about sex and places not to go and things like that. So I think that was definitely an issue years and years ago. Unfortunately, that's why they kept quiet.
Yeah. And Josephine, who's one of the attendees, has said there are layers of shame and self-blame from the abuser. So that's what she has had to say in regards to that. Also, the second question was part recorded. So the discussion point leading up to that second question that I asked the panelists or was talking to the panelists about, I was saying that the experiences of Black survivors at the hands of their family of authority is commonly and widely accepted. There is an unwillingness to openly address this issue, and what goes on in your house stays in your house mentality, which Sheree, you picked up on earlier, meaning a code of silence or denial, or things should be kept within a family or the community, is often applied. So in an article by Stephanie Hargrove called What's Hidden in Plain Sight, a look at child sexual abuse. She's an advocate, mentor and psychologist who's predominantly worked with victims of child sexual abuse in the Black community. She talks about in her article that the Black community have attributes of collectivist culture, such as sacrificing the interests of the individual, in this case, the victim, for what is best of the interests of the group, meaning the family, church, community. So my question is two in parts. Why is it easier to ignore, deny, or remain silent about possible allegations of child sexual abuse, CSA, rather than address it? And also, do you agree with Stephany that the Black community has this collectivist mindset, meaning that they're willing to sacrifice the one, being the victim, over the interests of the church, community or family? So I'd like to start with Tephany first with that question.
I hear what she's saying with the whole collective, sacrificing the one for the whole, but I honestly think the Black community is selfish and individual lies. Is like, what's that quote with the the crabs in the bucket, or what's the saying? It's like the crabs in the bucket. We'll climb and squish and kill each other to get to the top to be successful. I feel like sometimes that's the same when it comes to child abuse, where we'll sacrifice the one, but not necessarily for the community, but for the well-being of the parent or the well-being of so-and-so. It's not necessarily we're trying to protect the church, we're trying to protect the pastor. We're not trying to save the family. We just don't want mama's name to be drugged through the mud for not protecting the child. So that's my perspective on that. But I do believe that there are other barriers that make for child sexual abuse from being acknowledged or accepted or addressed, such as, I know in my particular case, my parent just was not financially stable. So I know that she feared like, okay, well, if I address this and say it's true, that means that, okay, I have to leave because that's the appropriate thing to do, but I'm not able to. I'm financially unstable. So it's easy for me to turn a blind eye to the situation than for me to try to figure out how can I take all of my children out of this harmful situation and move on. Or sometimes also I've seen from a child social worker perspective where parents are so, they want to be loved, they want to be in relationships, that they'll sacrifice their child's safety and well-being just for the sake of being loved by a partner. So it could be different factors that contribute to a lack of acknowledgement and a protective capacity from a parent. I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. So there's different reasons as to why they keep quiet or remain in denial. It could be financial reasons, it could be for selfish reasons and stuff like that. So Sheree, what would you say to that?
I mean, I agree totally with what my colleague has just said, and I know that I was looking at I think it was a film or so, and in the film, the mother, her child was being sexually abused by the school teacher, and someone was trying to tell her, your child, I have a concern that your child may be being sexually abused by one of the teachers, but because the mother, and it was a black mother, her child was in a very good school. And he I think he got a scholarship to go to the school, so this was quite a prestigious school, and for him to get in there, that was like, for her, she's a working class woman, for a child to get a scholarship and go to the school, that was something amazing. So when someone came now and said your child is being sexually abused, one of the teachers, the mother was saying, like, this may be happening, but at the end of the day, my child will be getting an education. And the lady was saying, but your child is going through, sexual abuse. He's being violated. And the mother was crying. She said, don't worry, I'm going to speak to my child. And it's something he will have to go through, because of the end result, the end result will be that he gets an education. And I think sometimes, I'm saying that to say that sometimes, as parents, why we look at the situation and we feel it's a means to an end. Black people, we're used to going through suffering, we're used to going through situations, so they may have a mindset sometimes that, okay, you're going through this, but at the end of the day, I'm going to get the end result. Like example, I know that if we look at situations, even like through slavery as well, mothers, their child may be going through some form of abuse, but they knew that the white massa or the white master would be still giving their child preferential treatment. So sometimes, and I'm not saying this is right, I'm just talking about mindsets right now. People sometimes do things as a means to an end because they feel they will get an end result. Also, as my colleague said about relationships, you may have an inkling if your boyfriend may be doing something to your child, but because you're so in love, and that's something that the Black community have to really look at those things, that you're willing to overlook, even though your child is coming and saying, Mum, he's touching me inappropriately. You're overlooking those things because at the end of the day, your love for this man. So I think, there are many barriers why a person doesn't report. Of course, we know, the stigma, the shame, not always wanting to be part of the community, but there are other factors why inherently why Black people have not really reported certain things. Also, it's one thing I would say in Black culture, especially in the West Indies, it's like it's almost normalized so much more. It's like for a father to kind of, what do they call it, pick a cherry when their child gets to a certain age as well, and so it's almost accepted.
So generational mindset and things that have been passed down from generations can also play a big part, besides selfish reasons.
Selfish reasons.
Yeah. Andrea in the chat has said the film is called Doubt. The film.
Yeah.
Is that the name of the film?
I think so. Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you.
So that's something that I'll definitely will check out, because I haven't actually watched that film. We're going to have some questions in a second from the attendees, but one other question I want to ask at this point is, and I'm going to get Tephany to share a little bit of her experience just in a few minutes' time, but the experiences of Black survivors. Now, this was one of the main driving forces for me to speak up and try and do an event to discuss sexual abuse in the Black community, was the experiences I have heard over the years of Black survivors that have been abused by family members. Some of the behaviour, I have experienced some of this myself, but some of the behaviour that other survivors, many survivors I should say, have experienced: name calling, blaming, being forced to apologise to the abuser, being ostracised by the family, ignored, shamed, bullied into recanting statement, emotionally blackmailed, threatened, amongst other behaviour that has had a traumatising and devastating effect on the victim's life. So, as mentioned, I'm going to ask Tephany just to take a few minutes to share with us how she came to be abused, who she was abused by, and what her experience of disclosure to her family was. Because I think it's really important that we hear firsthand, just for Tephany just to share with us for a few minutes her experiences. So Tephany, if you would share your experience of who you were sexually abused by, at what ages, and your experience of disclosing or trying to disclose your abuse.
Well, I was sexually abused pretty much by whichever man my mother brought into the home. And it started at around 5 years old, where she went to the club one night, brought him home, and he never left. And I believe the next following weekend, she went out again to the club and left him to watch us. And that night he had basically crept into the room to begin sexually abusing me. And this continued on until approximately 12, but in between, before we even get to my preteen years, I disclosed multiple times that I had been sexually abused. Now he's my stepfather because they got married a few months after meeting. And I share that I've been sexually abused, and I get called a liar. I get told that I'm making it up, that I just don't like him. There's so many things that happen. I get interrogated because he was in the Army. So they had his Army friends, interrogate me. And at the time I'm around 7 years old. And they put me in an environment where it's like a darkened room, and people I've never met before, men are in this little child's face saying, "You're a liar. He's never done it. Why would he do it?" My mother is allowing this to happen. My uncle's calling me on the phone saying, "I don't believe it. She's lying. Why would he do these things?" Ultimately, during this process, around 7 years old, of days of interrogation and being called a liar, told that I'd made all the story up for the last couple of years, he admits to it to my mother. He actually is standing in our living room, and I'm peeking around the corner in the hallway. He's telling my mother with a gun that he did it, and if she leaves him, he's going to commit suicide. So in that moment, I'm expecting him to commit suicide, because there's no way my mother is going to say, "Oh, I forgive you. It's okay. We'll get past this." I was very shocked to find out that, she embraced him and asked him, "Don't kill yourself. He's going to get help," is what he's saying. He disappeared for a couple of weeks. I think he went to the field for the military. He comes back and it starts all over again. And at this point, not only does she know, because I've told her more than once, but he's admitted to it, and he's not in his bed at night, he's in mine. So for years this goes on until they divorce. After they divorce, my mother then takes me to his home, and there's a financial transaction that occurs between them. Basically, in layman's terms, this is called trafficking. So I was trafficked by my mother to her ex-husband after they divorced, allowing him to continue to sexually abuse me. Eventually, I think they had some type of fallout, because she started saying, basically, she stopped taking me over to his home, but he started picking me up from the bus stop, and then that became an issue. Don't go with him anymore. Then my sister's father gets out of prison, moves into the home, and it starts all over again. And I'm sexually abused until I go to college. Everyone in the household knew because my sister's father was very blatant in his abuse. One time he was in the kitchen with me. It's a living, dining kitchen all in one room. You can't help but to see the entire room. He's actively groping me, touching my breast, touching my bottom, touching my vagina. And I'm literally saying, get him off me, help me. And I see my mother shift away to pretend she's watching the TV. She ignores the moment, but it was not a secret in our household. It's just something that it was allowed to happen.
Thank you for sharing your experiences with us, Tephany. Andrina in the comments says she's sorry that this has happened to you, ladies, but grateful you're speaking out as survivors. So, you know, you can take encouragement from that. So from your experiences, Tephany, and from your experiences, personal experiences and your work experiences, why do you think the blame and burden is put on the victim of childhood sexual abuse? I know we covered a little bit in one of the previous questions, but why do you believe the blame is put on the victim? I mean, even as a child, you've just shared there, 7 years old, you've gone through this experience, you're being interrogated in a room and all these different things. Why do you believe that this blame has been put on the victim rather than appropriately on the adult?
You know, that's a good question, because logically, it doesn't make sense that you will blame a child. A child can never give consent to be sexually abused. So how can any rational adult put the blame on the victim? But if you try to put yourself maybe in the other person's shoes, because something that sits with me that my mother said to me was basically she blamed me like I ruined her life. In her perspective, it was that anytime she brought a man home, he would end up between my legs. Instead of her saying, hey, something about the decisions I'm making and the men that I'm choosing is not correct. So it's easier for her to say, I'm making the wrong choices, which are gravely impacting my child, versus it's your fault I can't be happy. Because that's what she used to say, it's your fault I can't be happy. I can't keep no man here. No, it's you. And when I was working as a social worker, I will often see the parent. There was a parent who was a social worker herself, right? She her children ended up being removed because of sexual abuse. She would say, look at how she dresses her 14-year-old child. One, don't you buy her clothes? Two, there's nothing you can ever justify to say that why your 14-year-old is being raped by her biological father, whether it's stepfather, it doesn't matter. The child is being raped and you're saying it's because of her attire. So it's just, how can I get the blame? Like maybe they're not ready to acknowledge the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment that they feel because they feel that maybe I did not protect my child like I should have. Or it's easier like, so-and-so would never, I know this person, they presented this way to me, so how could they be that monster? People have different faces. You're not getting the abuser. Like most men aren't gonna beat their wives outside of the home, most of them. So sometimes it's shocking when you find out this other person has a different character. I think to sum it up, I believe that children or victims can be blamed because of the lack of accountability, lack of willing to accept that someone can be a monster.
It's easier to put the accountability on the victim or the child. It's easier to have that kind of confrontation with the child or blame the child rather than the actual perpetrator of the abuse, the adult or whoever it is.
It's not a one-sided accountability. The accountability has to go to the perpetrator, and it also has to go to the person who failed to act once they became aware of the abuse. And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially if you continue to allow it to happen after knowing.
Yeah. We're going to go and ask Sheree, touch with Sheree on this point. Just before we do, in the chat, we have a couple of comments. Josephine says, yes, you're brave to tell your story, Tephany. And also Andrina says, Tephany, you are an inspiration. Thanks for sharing. So Sheree, following on from that point, why do you believe the burden of CSA is put on the victim?
I think the burden of the CSA is put on the victim because CSA do not understand the Black community. They do not understand how Black people are. They have this unconscious bias towards us. They have stereotypes, and they don't know how, they don't know, I'm talking about social services here, they don't know how to work with victims of child abuse. But I think the guilt and everything is put on children of who have been sexually abused is because at the end of the day, it's easy, as my colleague said, it's easier to blame the child. They've initiated it in some way. They've done something that has made this person do this act to them, the perpetrator do this act to them. So they would rather blame the child than take responsibility, because it's easier to project that on someone else. A child going through this is massive. This is massive. They're going through so much. They're having so many different feelings. They're having so many different emotions. When they hear the things like, you're the one to blame, or you're the one, they can easily start believing those things as well, because they're going through a whirlwind of emotions anyway. And if someone is there now interrogating you or saying, what have you done, or trying to put that guilt and blame on you, then it really can, affect a child so much that they start to believe, am I doing something? Is there something wrong with me? Why this is happening? So I think it's all those factors taken into account. I was listening to my sister speak there, and my heart was really going out to her, because it was like, you would think your own mother would come to that realization. Her daughter is going through this, but it's like, they stripped that child, they stripped her of her voice. And that's what happens a lot in child sexual abuse. You're stripped of your voice, you're stripped of your power. Control of your own self is just taken away from you. And it's like you're now at the hand, you're the victims, and just vulnerable to whoever. That's why the offense can keep on being repeated, because you become, as my sister just said, they're powerless. And that's why the offence keeps on being repeated.
It's a sad state of affairs, really it is. And it's not fair to the child at all who's going through the experience. No. So we're going to, just a quick comment in the chat. We are going to take some questions in a second, but in the chat, Josephine says, the child is voiceless and is powerless because he or she has to submit to adult authority.
Yeah.
It's easier for a dysfunctional mother or adult who is in denial to do this.
And when the child is the blame or the problem,
yeah,
and the adults are the authoritarians, then you can control and fix the problem, aka be quiet about it. But if the other adult is the issue, then you have to confront it. People are not good with confrontation sometimes, but then it also opens up other avenues. How you correct the adult if you don't want the adult to leave.
And that could also be, again, about, we'll come to that later on in the discussion about looking at what could be done within families to initiate these powerful and difficult conversations, because really that is what it is. It's having a difficult conversation about something that is completely uncomfortable, but it does also need to be addressed. So at this point, I'd like to ask our attendees, if you have any questions, please type them up now. In a second, just put who your question is, put who your question is for, and then we will take a few questions around this segment that we've discussed at the moment. So I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, so we've got 3 questions here. Somebody anonymously said, pick a cherry, that's interesting. Not heard of that before. How prevalent is that still? So pick a cherry, Sheree. So I guess that question probably would be to you because you did mention it. Where does that saying come from?
Okay, that came from the West Indies. So what would happen is it was a kind of unspoken thing in a lot of the black communities in the West Indies.
At this point, the attendee raised the question with the panelists about Jimmy Savile. She was asking, since the disclosures about Jimmy Savile, do they believe anything has changed in terms of reporting or about the way that child sexual abuse is viewed in society and statutory organisations?
Changed a lot of policies now. We have like working together, sexual abuse, sexual abuse in education. There's a lot of the Child Act. There's a lot of policies and procedures that are now in place to safeguard children. And training is not done just for specific people, like designated safeguard officers or social workers or people in maybe management. Safeguarding is now something that is done throughout an organization and has to be done on an annual basis so that everyone is aware. And I think one of the things that's great that the government have done, they've said that any form of abuse, whether it's sexual, physical, neglect, emotional, is now everybody's responsibility. Before it was just like some people, and so those were the people that you had to report to. And if that information got mismanaged, a child could slip through the net. But right now, it's everybody's responsibility. So I think, they have learned. When we have our serious caseload reviews, people have learned from it. Sometimes the government is slow in the uptake because there's still unconscious bias that we need to look at. What they're doing now is they're recognizing, I think, especially because the Black Lives Matters movement, I think what it has done is opened up that the people in charge now are recognizing how they deal with sexual abuse, say with a white child. They need to look at certain things differently within the Black community, and not the BAME community, but they bunch all people of color together. But they have to look at things individually in the different community sections. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, so they are taking things a bit more seriously now.
Yeah.
Tephany, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I also, because I noticed that Sheree was saying that it's everybody's responsibility now, and especially in the United States, when it comes to sexual abuse, it's so hard to prosecute because it's a he say, she say type of a thing if there's no DNA. So I strongly advise and encourage everyone who is parenting, who knows anyone that's parenting, especially in the United States, to teach your children the appropriate language for body parts, because I have seen on trial in my cases where you'll get to the trial and the child will say, oh, they touched my no-no, or they touched my cookie, the cookie in the cookie jar. So then they're trying to deceive and manipulate the situation. The child could have been talking about the cookie in the cookie jar. So the person is able to get off or escape prosecution simply because the child couldn't properly identify their body part. So I just wanted to add that if anyone is parenting children, or you have your loved ones, please encourage them to say, hey, vagina, this is your vagina. These are, my breast, my chest, my bottom, so that if they ever have to testify, it doesn't come down to, oh, what's a no-no, what's a cookie? Yeah. We can't prosecute, because I've seen it happen more than once here.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Just in England, we for the NSPCC, we do the no pants rule. So we start teaching children body parts and how to speak about them properly from reception. We start giving that information, and they are now they've really upgraded like the sex education criteria for year 6. So now they are ensuring that people really have a greater understanding about their body parts, how to use it, how to protect yourself, you know, and what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So yeah.
Then we are really behind in these states.
And we will be touching more upon empowerment of children and how to support children a bit later on in the questions as well. Just kind of where we are at the moment in time. We've still got a lot to go through. Did have a quick question for Tephany from Josephine. She says, did you undergo therapy to throw away the blanket of shame, or do you still struggle with shame and blame that was put on you? So could you just kind of give us in a minute or so, quickly, you know, answer that question for us?
To answer your question, yes, I went through the standard therapy with like a mental health provider. That didn't do anything for me. I ended up going to counseling via my church's minister, and that faith-based counseling is actually what helped me heal, forgive, love myself, and still be able to love my parent despite of their lack of protection. As for shame, you know, oddly enough, I never felt shame. I always knew that what happened to me was not my fault. I didn't do anything, no matter what people were saying to me, to deserve this or that I caused this in any way, because I kept telling people, even outside of the home. I told a school counselor, I told a next door neighbor, and I ultimately got beat for running my mouth, but I did everything that I could to protect myself. And I always had at a very young age an awareness that my caretakers were failing me. So I never had that shame.
Thank you for answering that. We have a couple of other questions, and then we're going to go into the next part of the discussion. So yes, Josephine said, excellent. Thank you for answering her question. Kim has said her mum knew about the abuse. She said she doesn't have any kids now, but how does she deal with her mum being around her kids in the future? So if we could quickly answer that question, and Kim's second question, I think we will definitely come back to it during the course of the conversation. So anybody want to answer quickly that question that Kim has just posed? Okay, Tephany.
So my relationship with my mother is over the years. When she's appropriate, then I have her around. When she's inappropriate, I have strong boundaries. You can't be in my life. You can't be around my child. However, because of my experience with her, I'm sorry. Like maybe you've changed, maybe you haven't. I don't know. But what I do know is my experience with you, and my child won't be around you without me. Period.
Okay.
That's my boundary.
Thank you for answering that. I hope that's helped there, Kim. So we're going to go into our second set of questions now. We will come back to your second question, Kim, so I'll keep that open in the chat. There's a couple of questions there, so we will come back to that. So this question is just aimed really at Davina. I just want to get your thoughts on this. You are founder of an empowerment movement that supports victims of childhood sexual abuse on their journey to healing. From your experience and conversations and interactions with survivors, what are 3 challenges, or what are the challenges that are really kind of flagged up to you that Black victims, survivors face? You don't have to share people's names or anything like that, but what are the things that keep coming up?
I've had, since I shared my story, I've had older generation come to me, I've had younger children come to me, and I've had children, people my children's age. So it's been a bit of a challenge on each level. What I find going back to like the older generation is they're battling with it now, because even though they spoke, or some of them haven't spoken about it at all, but they've chosen to tell me, I find it can be quite hard and challenging for myself to sometimes, although I'm healing myself, hence the reason why I say Dav relate, because I'm trying to heal myself while trying to help you guys or whoever it is. It can be very challenging, and I do find them, that first word of speaking out, even when they spoke to me, it's helped them, just saying it to one person.
So when they're talking to you about their challenges,
Yeah.
What are they saying that the challenge is, why they can speak to you about it, but have they shared with you what their challenges are in telling anybody else? Like, is it how people would react, or what is the common themes?
The common theme is, because they are very outspoken or their character's quite bubbly, they just won't be believed. Oh, but that's how you are. But you're like that anyway, aren't you? So that was one of the main things that would come across. It's because we have grown to just get on with life and just be the bubbly person. And that is the main thing. They just scared they won't be believed because they're not walking around moping. And they're just not in a room on their own all the time. And they're not that person or that child just being away. They're still out there living life. So if they were to speak now, they're frightened that they will definitely not be believed because they're living life as some people will think they are. But inside, it's a whole different story.
So the main challenge for both young and old survivors is fear of not being believed.
Fear of not being believed, definitely, for young and old. They are just really scared that they're not going to be believed, or if they are going to be believed, that person will find a way of getting out of that scenario and then making it look like, making them feel even worse than what they feel like already.
Okay. Thank you for that, Davina. I'm just going to launch a quick poll. So I'm going to include the panelists as well at this point. I'm going to launch a poll and ask a question at this point. I don't know whereabouts on everybody's screen to answer the question. It's probably at the bottom on the toolbar. But the question I'm going to ask you is, what do you think? Why do you think child sexual abuse is underreported in the Black community? So you've got a range of answers there. Take 30 seconds. I hope you can all see the poll. If you can select your answer, and then I will share it with everybody. And it is anonymous, so I've made the poll anonymous, so I won't know who's answered which question. But if you can answer the question, that'd be great. So I'll give you another 10 seconds.
Oh man, I want to choose more than one.
You can press other.
Oh, I can't see it.
You can use other. Everybody had a chance at, well, we've got a couple more. The poll results are, in terms of the question I asked about why do you think child sexual abuse is underreported in the Black community, 38% said family think this is something that should be dealt with in-house. Nobody selected lack of awareness, education of what CSA is. 50% said victim survivor, scared to speak out for fear of consequences. And 13%, one person said other reasons. Okay, thank you guys for taking part in that poll. So the next question I have for the panel is, do you think assumptions, stereotypes and perceptions within the Black community play a part in why child sexual abuse is hard to address? So for example, in the case of R. Kelly, we all know that R. Kelly is a worldwide famous singer, Grammy award-winning superstar, whatever. He's currently in jail awaiting trial for child sexual abuse and child pornography charges. After the documentary came out, Surviving R. Kelly, many people, many Black people, specifically Black women, were vilifying the victims, calling them, a lot of them were underage, but they were calling them names like they're too fast, too grown, blaming them for their abuse straight off the bat, whilst defending R. Kelly, okay? Even though he has had these allegations against him before. There is a perception that Black girls cannot be victims. There's also stereotypes and labels such as the strong Black woman, which is extended to Black girls, and the notion that even as victims of crime, we should just suck it up and get on with it. In addition to this, for Black male survivors, this is amplified with the stereotype of the Black, strong, hyper-masculine male, as well as the other challenges that affect all male survivors across different ethnicities, that boys don't cry, to be sexually abused by another male is makes you gay, means that you're gay, that you're weak. Boys are meant to be strong. Do you think that these stereotypes and all these perceptions, assumptions play a part within our community that hinder victims and survivors? So, Tephany, would you like to start?
I would say yes, and it's double folded with like the R. Kelly. I couldn't watch the documentary; it was gonna trigger me. But I did see a lot of reviews of the victim shaming and blaming and bashing, especially because they were underage women. Where it's here we go putting the blame on the child who cannot consent to be sexually abused because you like this artist. Not that he did anything wrong, it's she's fast, she should have been and not in his face, or etc. And I think this has to go towards, if you look at our community, a lot of our households do not have fathers. We are left vulnerable and unprotected. So a lot of the times, I don't know the statistics there, but here in the United States, I believe about 40% of traffic victims are Black girls. So we're left very unprotected and out there for people to take advantage of us and sexually abuse us and victimize us because we have no one to stand in front of us to shield us. Mm-hmm. So here we go, people from our own community who have maybe even been victims themselves are now playing into that blaming victim mentality instead of seeing, hey, where was this child's father to protect her? Where was the grandfather to protect her? Because most in the United States, a lot of us are raised by our grandparents if the parents are absent. So I would say, yes, I agree that a lot of that stigma is true when it comes to child sexual abuse.
Thank you, Tephany. Sheree, do you agree?
Yeah.
Do you think that stereotypes in our community helps to, hinders us?
I mean, definitely. It's so sad that that we as Black women, we victimize other Black women. Society feel that Black girls, we're over sexualized. A lot of Black girls are over sexualized from a very young age, and that mindset again, it goes back to slavery, that they felt that the Black girl was over sexualized. And even social workers, if we look at social workers and we look at different statistics, they will say that Black girls are over sexualized.